Take the guitar away from her. Ronald Pierce's order cut across the glass-walled music room on the 42nd floor of Vantage Core. 12-year-old Stephanie Hayes sat beneath the stage lights, both hands locked around the instrument while foundation donors watched through the open doors. One hearing aid had begun squealing, and Ronald, director of the company's charity showcase, had already decided the rehearsal was over. "She cannot hear the tempo," he said, as if deafness made her invisible. "This is becoming embarrassing." Stephanie read enough from his lips to understand. Her fingers slipped from the strings. Kenneth Brooks stopped pushing his janitorial cart. He was not a teacher. He was a night shift custodian, a single dad who counted every extra hour because his 13-year-old son lived with him most weeks. But he recognized the way Stephanie folded inward. His own son did that whenever adults spoke about him instead of to him. Kenneth crossed the floor before fear could stop him. "She doesn't need to hear it the way you do," he said. Ronald stared at his gray uniform. "Return to your work." Kenneth crouched beside Stephanie, pointed to the hollow body of the guitar, and signed the few words he knew. "Feel. Here. Together." Her eyes lifted. He placed her palm against the wood, tapped a slow 4-count near the bridge, and guided her other hand to one chord. The first sound was rough. Ronald reached forward to end it. Then Stephanie caught the vibration. One chord became 2. Kenneth tapped the beat against the guitar's side, and she followed through her fingertips, wrist, and chest. The simple melody steadied. Stephanie smiled so suddenly that Kenneth forgot everyone else. Behind the half-closed observation door, CEO Carol Hayes pressed both hands over her mouth. Ronald noticed her reflection in the glass, but before Carol could enter, he grabbed Kenneth's badge. "You're suspended. Effective now." Before we continue, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss stories about ordinary people whose courage changes everything. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from. Now, as Ronald held Kenneth's badge like proof of guilt, Carol pushed open the observation door and walked straight toward them. Carol Hayes crossed the room without looking at Ronald. Her attention remained on Stephanie, who still held the last chord beneath her fingertips, as if letting the vibration finish. "Play it again," Carol said. Stephanie's smile vanished. She had seen her mother enter, but now the room felt crowded with expectation. Kenneth noticed her shoulders tightening and stepped away from the guitar. "No," he said quietly. "Not for them." Ronald gave a disbelieving laugh. "You do not decide what happens in this building." Kenneth turned toward Carol. "She was playing because she felt safe. The second this becomes a performance, you may lose that." Several donors exchanged uncomfortable glances. Carol could have reminded him that she owned the company and that he had entered a restricted rehearsal. Instead, she lowered herself into the chair beside her daughter. Stephanie signed quickly. Carol answered with practiced hands, though her movements were less fluid. "What did she say?" Kenneth asked. Carol hesitated. She asked why everyone keeps wanting her to prove she can do things. The question landed harder than Ronald's threat. Kenneth knelt again, leaving enough space for Stephanie to choose whether he came closer. He tapped the guitar once, then pointed toward the empty hallway. "We can stop," he signed carefully. "Or play for you." Stephanie studied him, then pointed at his chest. "For you?" Kenneth shook his head and gestured toward her. "For you." She adjusted the guitar against her body. Kenneth placed 2 fingers against the wooden edge and tapped the beat they had found. Stephanie began again. The melody was only 8 measures, a children's folk tune Brian had learned years earlier during music therapy. Kenneth remembered sitting beside his son while the therapist taught them to count rhythm through touch. Brian was not deaf, but severe anxiety had once made spoken instructions almost impossible for him to follow. Music had given them a language before conversation returned. Stephanie missed the 3rd chord. She stopped, frowned, and looked toward Ronald. He had folded his arms. Kenneth tapped the mistake exactly as she had played it, then changed the next beat so the wrong chord became the beginning of a new pattern. Stephanie's eyebrows rose. She followed him, experimenting instead of apologizing. By the final measure, the melody no longer sounded like the tune Kenneth remembered. It belonged to her. Carol's phone vibrated on the table. She ignored it. When Stephanie finished, she did not search the donors' faces. She pressed both palms against the guitar and closed her eyes, smiling at the fading resonance. Carol signed something to her. Stephanie answered with one sharp motion. "She says she wants Kenneth to teach her," Carol translated. Ronald stepped between them. "Absolutely not. He has no qualifications, no clearance, and after today, no job." Carol finally faced him. "Why was my daughter placed in a showcase she asked not to join?" Ronald's confidence flickered. "This event will fund the Accessibility Initiative. Her appearance shows what your company supports. My daughter is not company branding." He lowered his voice. "The invitations are out. Investors expect her." Carol took Kenneth's badge from Ronald and returned it. "Then the investors will learn to expect something else." Ronald's jaw tightened. "And what exactly is that?" Carol glanced at Kenneth, then at the guitar resting against Stephanie's heart. "A program built around what deaf children actually need," she said. "And Kenneth is going to help us design it." Kenneth did not answer immediately. The donors had begun slipping from the room, carrying their silence with them. Ronald remained near the door, watching Carol as if waiting for her to remember that decisions involving company programs required meetings, budgets, and approval. Stephanie, however, had already opened the guitar case and placed the instrument inside with careful hands. "I clean offices," Kenneth said. "I don't design programs." "You understood her in 5 minutes better than 3 consultants did in 6 months, Carol replied. "That doesn't make me qualified." "No," Carol said, "but it makes you useful." The words sounded colder than she intended. Kenneth's expression tightened. "I've spent enough years being useful to people who don't learn my name." Carol lowered her eyes toward the stitched label above his pocket. She had walked past Kenneth more than once during late meetings. She remembered his cart, his quiet nod, the way he always moved aside before executives reached the elevator. Until that moment, she had never known whether he had children, ambitions, or anyone waiting for him after midnight. Stephanie touched Carol's sleeve and signed. Carol translated reluctantly. "She says you knew her name." Kenneth glanced at the girl. "It was written on the rehearsal schedule." "You still used it," Carol said. His phone buzzed. The school number appeared across the cracked screen. Kenneth stepped into the hallway to answer. His voice remained low at first, then sharpened. "No, I understand. Please don't send him home alone. I'll be there." He ended the call and pushed the phone into his pocket. "Brian?" Carol asked. Kenneth nodded. He had another panic episode during lunch. They found him hiding in the auditorium storage room. "You should go. I should have gone an hour ago." The bitterness was directed at himself, not at her. Carol followed him toward the service elevator. "Does this happen often?" "Less than before." "What caused it?" Kenneth pressed the button. His mother left 2 years ago. She calls when she feels guilty and makes promises when she feels lonely. Brian believes every one of them. The elevator opened. Kenneth stepped inside, but Carol stopped the doors with one hand. "I wasn't asking you to volunteer," she said. "The program would be paid work. I already have paid work. At night, while your son needs you during the day." He stared at her. The observation was accurate enough to feel intrusive. "My schedule keeps food in our apartment. I can offer you daytime hours. And when your board decides the janitor experiment looks foolish, this is not an experiment." Kenneth's eyes shifted toward Ronald, who had followed them from the music room. Ronald adjusted his cuff. "Your caution is reasonable. A temporary assignment could end at any time. Your current position might not remain available." Carol turned. That sounded like a threat. It was an operational reality. Kenneth understood the choice Ronald was placing before him. Accept Carol's offer, and he could lose the only stable job he had held since gaining primary custody of Brian. Refuse, and Stephanie would return to instructors who saw her as a symbol before they saw her as a child. Stephanie appeared behind her mother, clutching a folded sheet of music. She handed it to Kenneth. Across the top, she had written his name. Beneath it were 8 uneven measures from the melody they had created together. Kenneth ran his thumb over the pencil marks. "I can give you 3 afternoons," he said. "Nothing permanent. And Brian comes with me if school ends early." Ronald's smile was thin. "Then we will evaluate whether either of you belongs here." Kenneth folded the music and placed it in his pocket. "No," he said. "Stephanie will decide whether I belong." Kenneth arrived at Vantage Corps the following Tuesday, wearing his janitor's uniform because Ronald had refused to authorize anything else. The first session took place in the same glass music room. Stephanie sat with the guitar across her knees, while Carol remained outside to avoid making her feel observed. Brian occupied a chair near the wall, hood pulled over his head, sketching shapes in a notebook. Ronald entered carrying a tablet and 2 printed forms. "Before we begin," he said, "Mr. Brooks must sign a release acknowledging that he is not an instructor and accepts responsibility for any disruption." Kenneth read the first paragraph. The language placed every risk on him while giving the company permission to use photographs and recordings from the sessions. "No cameras," he said. "The program requires documentation." Stephanie didn't agree to become an advertisement. Ronald's mouth tightened. Her mother approved the initiative. Her mother isn't holding the guitar. Kenneth pushed the forms back. Ronald picked them up slowly. "Then this session cannot proceed." Stephanie had followed enough of the exchange to understand. She placed the guitar in its case and began fastening the latches. Carol entered from the hallway. "Why is she leaving?" Ronald handed her the forms. "Mr. Brooks refuses basic oversight." Carol scanned the page. "He's right about the recording clause. That clause protects the program you announced without consulting anyone." The accusation struck its target. Carol had told senior staff that morning that Vantage Corps would replace the showcase with a small accessibility pilot. She had intended to protect Stephanie, but she had still made the decision before asking what her daughter wanted. Carol turned to Stephanie and signed a question. Stephanie answered without hesitation. "She wants the lessons," Carol said. "She doesn't want an audience." Ronald adjusted his tablet against his chest. "Private lessons with an unlicensed employee create liability. We can cancel the pilot and return to the original showcase plan." "No," Kenneth said. Carol glanced at him. "What are you proposing?" Kenneth removed his employee badge and placed it on the table. "If my job is the excuse he keeps using, take it away. Put me on a 30-day contract for the pilot. Daytime hours, no cameras. Stephanie can stop whenever she wants." Brian's pencil stopped moving. Kenneth had not discussed this with him. The janitorial position provided health insurance, predictable overtime, and the small sense of safety they had rebuilt after months of missed rent. A temporary contract offered none of that. Carol understood immediately. "You don't have to resign. If I keep both roles, Ronald can end this every time a trash bin is late." Ronald's eyes narrowed. Kenneth had removed the leverage he expected to use, but he had also made himself easier to dismiss. Carol picked up the badge. "I can guarantee 30 days and preserve your benefits during that period. After 30 days, we evaluate the program." Brian stood so quickly that his notebook fell. "Dad, don't." Kenneth saw fear rising in his son's face and made the mistake of answering too sharply. "I know what I'm doing. You always say that before something changes." Brian grabbed his backpack and walked into the hallway. Kenneth nearly followed, but Stephanie touched the guitar and tapped the 4 count he had taught her. One promise pulled him toward his son. Another held him inside the room. Kenneth signed the contract. Ronald added his signature beneath it, then said, "30 days will be more than enough." Through the glass, Kenneth watched Brian enter the elevator alone. Kenneth called Brian 3 times before the elevator returned. Each call went unanswered. Carol offered to send security downstairs, but Kenneth refused. "That will make it worse." He found Brian in the employee cafeteria, seated beneath a vending machine light with his backpack between his shoes. The boy had opened his notebook again, though the page remained blank. Kenneth sat across from him. I shouldn't have said I knew what I was doing. Brian kept his eyes lowered. Are we going to lose the apartment? No. You don't know that. Kenneth could not deny it. His son had lived through too many assurances that later became excuses. I know I chose before talking to you, Kenneth said. That was wrong. Brian rubbed his sleeve. You chose her. I chose work I thought mattered, but I made you feel like you didn't. The vending machine hummed between them. Kenneth waited. Finally, Brian pushed his notebook across the table. The earlier sketches were not random shapes. They were rows of squares, circles, and heavy black lines. What are these? Kenneth asked. The beat you were tapping. Brian pointed. Squares are long, circles are short. Thick lines mean she presses harder. Kenneth studied the page. Brian had watched the first lesson more closely than either adult realized. Would you show Stephanie? Brian shrugged, but he picked up the notebook. Back in the music room, Stephanie examined the drawings with immediate interest. Brian tore out a clean page and drew 4 large boxes. Kenneth tapped the rhythm while Brian shaded each box as the vibration changed. Stephanie copied the pattern beneath the guitar strings with removable textured tape. Smooth for quiet notes, rough for stronger ones. Kenneth stopped directing them. Brian drew. Stephanie tested. When a chord produced the wrong vibration, she crossed out a shape and replaced it. Their system was imperfect, but it belonged to them. Carol watched from the hallway. This time, she did not enter. After 20 minutes, Stephanie waved her inside. She handed Carol the notebook, then signed slowly enough for her mother to follow. Carol's hands trembled when she answered. What did she say? Kenneth asked. She said this is the first music lesson where nobody kept telling her what she was missing. Stephanie repositioned the guitar and began the melody again. The tune remained simple, but every change now had a visual mark and a texture she had chosen. Brian tapped the final count against the table. The last chord rang through the wood. Stephanie reached for her mother's hand and pressed it against the guitar so Carol could feel the vibration fading. Carol closed her fingers around Stephanie's. No donors applauded. No camera captured the moment. Yet it was the first time in years that mother and daughter had shared music without one pretending to experience it like the other. Kenneth smiled at Brian. You built half of this, Brian corrected him. Stephanie did. I just made the map. At the doorway, Ronald had been watching. He entered after Stephanie closed the guitar case. A touching session, he said. But 30 days cannot be judged by feelings. He placed a schedule on the table. At the bottom was a date 2 weeks away. Carol read it. What is this? The Foundation Committee expects evidence that the pilot works, Ronald replied. Stephanie will perform one complete piece for them. Kenneth looked toward her. Stephanie had already understood. Her hand tightened around the notebook. Kenneth picked up the performance schedule and tore it once through the middle. Ronald did not flinch. Destroying the paper does not remove the obligation. There is no obligation, Kenneth said. Stephanie agreed to lessons, not a public test. Carol placed both halves on the table. I will speak with the Foundation Committee. You already spoke with them, Ronald replied. Last spring. He opened the tablet and turned it toward her. A photograph showed Carol standing beside Stephanie at a company fundraiser, one hand resting on her daughter's shoulder. Beneath it was the announcement for Vantage Corps' annual accessibility campaign. The final paragraph promised that Stephanie Hayes would present a personal musical achievement at the Foundation showcase. Carol read the sentence twice. Kenneth watched recognition replace anger. You approve this? I approve the campaign language, Carol said. I did not approve forcing her to perform. Ronald tapped the screen. The donors committed funding after that announcement. Canceling now will suggest the company used Stephanie's disability to secure support. Stephanie had stopped watching their faces. She opened Brian's notebook and began erasing the rhythm map until gray smudges covered the page. Brian reached for it. "Hey, we need that." She pulled it away. Kenneth crouched beside her and signed, "No performance." Stephanie pointed toward Carol's photograph on the tablet, then toward herself. "You promised," Brian translated before Carol could. Carol moved closer. "I made a promise I should not have made." Stephanie closed the notebook and shoved it into Brian's hands. Then she placed the guitar in its case and carried it from the room. Carol started after her, but Kenneth blocked the doorway. "Give her space. She is my daughter. And right now, she thinks everyone in this building had a plan for her except her." Carol's expression hardened. "Do not tell me how to raise her." Kenneth regretted the words that followed even as he spoke them. "Then stop raising a company symbol." Carol stepped back as though he had struck her. Brian stared at the floor. Ronald quietly collected the torn schedule. "This is precisely why personal employees should not advise executives." Kenneth turned on him. "You knew about that announcement before the first lesson." "Of course. And you waited until she trusted us." "I waited until there was something measurable to present." The answer revealed more than Ronald intended. He had not opposed the pilot because he believed it would fail. He had allowed it to succeed just enough to make Stephanie's progress useful. Kenneth moved toward him, but Brian caught his sleeve. "Dad." The single word stopped him. Ronald slipped the tablet under his arm. "The committee arrives in 14 days. Without a performance, the pilot ends. Your contract ends with it." After he left, Carol remained beside the empty chair where Stephanie had been sitting. Kenneth forced himself to breathe. "I shouldn't have said that about your daughter. You were not entirely wrong. That doesn't make it right." Carol picked up a small piece of textured tape that had fallen from the guitar. "I kept thinking visibility would protect her. Every time someone underestimated Stephanie, I put her in front of more people so they could see what she could do. And she learned that love comes with an audience." Carol closed her hand around the tape. Across the room, Brian tore the damaged rhythm page from his notebook. Kenneth expected him to throw it away. Instead, Brian folded it carefully and placed it in his backpack. "She won't come back tomorrow," he said. Kenneth looked through the glass toward the elevators where Stephanie had disappeared. "No," he answered. "Not unless we give her a reason that has nothing to do with saving my job." Stephanie did not return the next afternoon. Kenneth spent the empty session removing chairs from the music room. He had convinced himself that fewer seats would make the space feel safer. But Brian watched him drag the fifth chair into the hallway and finally spoke. "You're still deciding for her." Kenneth stopped. "I'm trying to make it easier." That's what Ms. Hayes thought she was doing. The comparison stung because it was true. Kenneth had condemned Carol for turning Stephanie into a symbol, yet he had also assumed he knew what Stephanie needed. He had promised there would be no performance before asking whether she wanted one. Protecting someone could become another way of controlling them when fear made all the decisions. Carol arrived alone carrying the guitar case. "She asked me to bring this," she said. Kenneth looked toward the elevator. "Is she coming?" "I don't know." Carol placed the case on the table. Tucked beneath the handle was a folded page covered in Stephanie's handwriting. At the top, she had written 3 sentences. "I want to play. I do not want them watching me like proof. I want them to understand how I hear it." Below the words was a drawing of the music room. The foundation committee members were not seated in rows. They stood around several wooden platforms with their hands pressed against the surfaces. Lines connected the platforms to the guitar and a large speaker placed on the floor. Brian leaned over the page. "She wants them to feel the song." Carol nodded. "She designed it last night." Kenneth read the first sentence again. He had mistaken Stephanie's anger for refusal. She had never rejected the music. She had rejected the role everyone else had written for her. "I told her there would be no performance," he said. "You thought you were protecting her." I didn't ask. Carol folded her arms. Neither did I. The elevator opened. Stephanie stepped out carrying Brian's damaged rhythm page. She approached him first and returned it, repaired with clear tape. Then she faced Kenneth. He signed slowly. I was wrong. Stephanie waited. Kenneth continued, using speech when his limited signing failed him. I decided what you wanted because I was angry and afraid. That wasn't listening. Carol interpreted the words he could not sign. Stephanie studied both adults, then pointed toward the drawing. Can it work? Carol asked. Kenneth examined the platforms. The floor speakers from the showcase can send vibration through plywood. We would need separate surfaces for different ranges. Brian tapped the drawing. And lights for the rhythm map, not flashing fast, just changing with each section. Stephanie smiled and signed rapidly. Carol translated. She wants the committee to wear sound-blocking headphones. Kenneth understood the reversal immediately. Stephanie would still play, but the donors would not receive the polished, inspirational moment Ronald had promised. They would enter her experience instead of judging it from outside. Ronald appeared at the doorway before Kenneth could answer. He studied the drawing. This is not a musical performance. Stephanie turned toward him and signed one sentence. Carol's voice remained calm as she translated. She says it is a performance. You are simply not the audience anymore. Ronald stepped into the room. The committee funded a demonstration of achievement, not an experiment that makes donors uncomfortable. Kenneth placed the drawing flat on the table. Then discomfort is what we demonstrate. Ronald looked at Carol. If this fails, the committee withdraws its support. Carol glanced at Stephanie. And if we refuse, we prove this program was never hers. She picked up a marker and wrote approved across the bottom of the drawing. Ronald left without another word. Stephanie opened the guitar case, but instead of handing the instrument to Kenneth, she placed it in her own lap. This time, she tapped the first count. For the next 6 days, the music room became a workshop. Kenneth built 3 low wooden platforms from unused display panels stored beneath the auditorium stage. Brian marked each one with a different shape, so Stephanie could identify the vibration range without reading labels. Carol ordered compact floor speakers, but she refused to involve the company's communications team. Only the 4 of them entered the room. Stephanie chose every part of the arrangement. The deepest guitar notes traveled through the largest platform. Higher notes moved through a narrow board beneath the donor's fingertips. Brian programmed slow bands of light to follow the rhythm map, while Kenneth adjusted the speakers until the wood vibrated without shaking. Their first complete test failed. The low platform rattled so violently that Carol's coffee tipped over. Stephanie laughed, but Kenneth slammed his hand against the power switch. We're running out of time. Brian stepped away from the controls. It was one mistake. One mistake during the showcase could make them shut everything down. Stephanie's smile disappeared. Kenneth recognized the expression too late. He was no longer teaching her to explore. He was teaching her to fear failure. He crouched beside the platform. I'm sorry. Again? Stephanie did not answer. She handed the guitar to Carol and walked out. Kenneth started to follow, but Carol blocked him. You cannot apologize after every outburst and expect her to trust you. I'm trying to keep this alive. So am I. No, you can survive if the committee hates it. Brian and I can't. Carol's grip tightened around the guitar. You think money makes loss harmless? I think it makes rent easier. Brian turned off the rhythm lights and left through the opposite door. Carol set the guitar down carefully. You are afraid, Kenneth. I understand that. But you use that fear like permission to wound everyone before they can disappoint you. He stared at her. She continued before courage failed. Stephanie does not need another adult whose love disappears when things become difficult. My love isn't disappearing. Then stop making her earn your calm. Kenneth walked out without replying. He found Brian sitting on the service stairs between the 41st and 42nd floors. The boy had the repaired rhythm page open across his knees. "Are you quitting?" Brian asked. Kenneth sat one step below him. "Do you want me to?" "I want you to stop acting like every problem means we're about to lose everything." Kenneth leaned against the railing. For 2 years, every unexpected bill, school call, and schedule change had felt like the beginning of another collapse. He had taught Brian that survival meant preparing for disaster before it arrived. "I don't know how to stop quickly," Kenneth admitted. Brian folded the page along its taped seam. "Then stop once, right now." When they returned, Stephanie was standing beside Carol in the music room. Kenneth did not ask her to continue. He unplugged the largest speaker, removed the platform that kept rattling, and placed 2 chairs where it had been. "We don't need to make every note perfect," he said. "We only need the ones you want them to feel." Stephanie considered this, then picked up the guitar. The revised arrangement was smaller and quieter. It also worked. Near sunset, Ronald entered holding the final showcase program. Stephanie's name appeared beneath Carol's photograph, followed by the words "inspirational performance." Carol crossed out the phrase. "What should it say?" she asked. Stephanie took the pen and wrote, "Listen without hearing." Ronald read it and shook his head. "The committee will never approve that." Carol handed the program back. "They already did," she said. "They simply do not know it yet." The evening before the showcase, Carol asked Kenneth and Brian to stay after Stephanie left. She stood beside the glass wall with the crossed-out program in her hand. Below them, employees were removing company banners from the auditorium. "There is something Stephanie has not told you," she said. "Because I asked her not to talk about it." Kenneth's expression hardened. "What happened?" 2 years ago, she played piano at a foundation dinner." Carol pressed the program against her palm. She had practiced one short piece for months. That night, the stage monitor failed, and the vibrations beneath the piano were almost impossible for her to follow. She stopped after 20 seconds. Kenneth pictured Stephanie beneath the lights, searching for a rhythm that had disappeared. What did the audience do? Some waited, some whispered. One donor started recording. Carol's voice weakened. Stephanie ran backstage. I followed her, but Ronald stopped me. He said if I went after her, everyone would remember the failure. He told me to return to the stage and explain how courageous she was. "And you did," Brian said. Carol nodded. She had stood before 300 people and turned her daughter's fear into a polished speech about perseverance. The applause had been enormous. Donations doubled before midnight. In the car home, Stephanie removed her hearing aids and refused to face her mother. The next morning, Carol continued, Ronald wrote the campaign language promising another musical achievement. He said we needed to replace the image of her running away. Kenneth understood why Ronald needed this showcase. He had built his reputation on converting painful moments into useful stories. Stephanie's performance would prove his first decision had been right. "You let him publish it," Kenneth said. "Yes." "Why?" "Because I was ashamed. Not of her. Of myself." Carol's eyes filled. "I thought a successful second performance could erase what I had done." Brian closed the laptop. "It can't." "No," Carol said, "and asking her to perform tomorrow may still be the same mistake." Kenneth looked toward the auditorium. The platforms were ready. The headphones had been tested. Stephanie had chosen the music. Canceling now would take her choice away just as surely as forcing her onto the stage. He glanced at Brian and recognized the same damage in a different form. Fear had made both parents call control protection. "Does she know you remember it that way?" he asked. "She thinks I remember only the donations." "Then tell her." Carol found Stephanie in the rehearsal room, sitting alone with the guitar across her lap. Kenneth and Brian remained outside as Carol knelt before her daughter. Carol signed slowly. She stopped twice, searching for words, then began again. Stephanie did not move until her mother reached the part about returning to the stage instead of following her backstage. Then she set the guitar aside. Carol lowered her hands. Stephanie lifted hers and signed one question. Carol answered aloud. She asked what I will do differently tomorrow. Carol picked up the printed program, tore away the panel carrying her photograph, and placed the blank half in Stephanie's hands. I will not introduce you, she said. I will not explain you. And if you walk away, I will walk with you. Stephanie read her lips, then handed Carol the guitar. She tapped 4 counts against its wooden body. Carol followed the rhythm. Outside, Kenneth opened the schedule and removed the CEO's speech entirely. The showcase began at 7 the next evening. No company banner stood behind the stage. No photograph of Carol appeared on the program. The foundation committee entered expecting a speech and found 12 sound-blocking headphones beside 3 wooden platforms. Ronald intercepted Kenneth near the curtain. You still have time to stop this, he said. Let Carol speak. Let Stephanie play one clean piece, and the committee will leave satisfied. Kenneth adjusted the cable beneath the nearest platform. Satisfied is not the same as understanding. It is the difference between funding and failure. Across the room, Brian checked the rhythm lights. Carol stood beside Stephanie without touching her, waiting for the girl to decide when to begin. The committee chair, Deborah Shaw, examined the headphones. Are these necessary? Stephanie stepped forward and signed. Carol did not translate. Instead, Brian pointed to the instruction card. Wear them. Place one hand on the platform. Watch when the light changes. Deborah frowned, but she obeyed. The others followed. Kenneth gave Stephanie the guitar. She tapped 4 counts. The first notes moved through the wood in slow pulses. Low vibrations traveled beneath the committee members' palms while Brian's lights marked the rhythm in wide bands. With the headphones blocking the room's sound, no one could judge the melody by pitch alone. They had to wait for pressure, movement, and pattern. Stephanie reached the section that had frightened her all week. Her fingers slipped. The vibration stopped. Kenneth expected her to look toward him, but she turned to Carol. Her mother remained beside the stage, hands lowered, offering no command. Stephanie took a breath and began the measure again. This time, she finished it. When the final vibration faded, Deborah removed her headphones slowly. 2 committee members were smiling. One rubbed his palm as though the sensation remained there. Ronald stepped forward before anyone could speak. A powerful demonstration, he said. Now we will hear from our CEO about the program's future. Carol did not move. There is no speech, she said. Ronald's expression tightened. The committee requires context. The context was Stephanie's choice. Deborah closed the program. And what exactly are we being asked to fund? Carol answered honestly. We have not built the full program yet. We have 1 student, 1 temporary instructor, and a method created partly by 2 children. The warmth in the room cooled. Deborah looked toward Kenneth. What credentials do you hold? None that would satisfy this committee. Ronald lowered his eyes, hiding relief. Deborah gathered the papers. Then the foundation cannot approve a permanent grant tonight. The words struck Kenneth with physical force. Without the grant, the pilot ended. Without the pilot, his contract ended at midnight. Brian understood before anyone explained. Does Dad lose his job? Carol's silence answered him. Kenneth knelt beside his son. We'll figure it out. Brian pulled away. That's what you said before. He walked out of the auditorium. Kenneth followed him into the corridor, but the elevator doors closed before he reached them. His phone buzzed with an automatic notice confirming the expiration of his temporary contract. For the first time in 12 years, Kenneth had no job to return to. Behind him, applause began inside the auditorium, not for a victory, but for Stephanie, who had chosen to finish. Kenneth stared at the closed elevator. Then he remembered the repaired rhythm page inside Brian's backpack. and the promise he had made to stop acting as though every loss meant the end of everything. Kenneth found Brian in the lobby, sitting on the floor beside the locked revolving doors. Rain streaked the glass behind him. His backpack rested against his chest, both arms wrapped around it as though everything their family still owned was inside. Kenneth sat beside him. "I lost the contract," he said. Brian stared at the wet sidewalk. "Are we going to lose the apartment?" "I don't know." The honesty frightened Kenneth more than any promise would have, but Brian finally turned toward him. "I should have talked to you before I signed," Kenneth continued. "I wanted to help Stephanie, and I wanted to prove I could do more than clean offices. I told myself those reasons made the risk okay. Did they? No, not without you." The elevator opened behind them. Ronald crossed the lobby carrying Kenneth's old employee badge. "The janitorial position has not been filled," he said. "I can restore it tonight." Kenneth rose slowly. Ronald held out the badge. Same shift, same benefits, no interruption in payroll. Brian looked at his father with sudden hope. "What do you want?" Kenneth asked. "A signed statement confirming that the pilot operated without proper authorization. Carol will accept responsibility for the announcement, and the Foundation will reconsider supporting a conventional program led by certified professionals. And Stephanie's system. It becomes company property. It was developed in this building using company equipment." Brian gripped his backpack tighter. Inside it were his drawings, Stephanie's rhythm map, and the repaired page that had started everything. Ronald lowered his voice. "You have a child to support. Carol has wealth. Stephanie has every advantage. You are the only person here who cannot afford principles." The badge rested between them. Kenneth thought of overdue rent, Brian's therapy appointments, and the refrigerator that had begun making a grinding noise. Returning to the night shift would restore the small, exhausting safety he understood. Then Brian unzipped his backpack. He removed the repaired rhythm page and held it toward Ronald. "You can keep the wooden speakers," Brian said. "But you didn't make this." Ronald ignored him. "Kenneth, take the badge." Kenneth reached out. Brian's shoulders dropped, but Kenneth did not take it. He closed Ronald's fingers around the plastic card. "My son is right. You are choosing unemployment. I'm choosing not to teach him that fear gives people ownership of his work." Ronald's calm finally cracked. "That method has no value without this company." Stephanie appeared near the elevator with Carol behind her. She had removed her performance shoes and carried the guitar case in one hand. Kenneth faced her and signed carefully. "Do you want to leave?" Stephanie shook her head. She placed the guitar case on the lobby floor, opened it, and pointed toward Brian's rhythm page. Then she gestured toward the auditorium. Brian understood first. "She wants to finish what we started." "The performance is over," Ronald said. Carol stepped beside her daughter. "The committee has not left." Kenneth looked toward the elevator, then at Brian. "If we go back up," he said, "it cannot be to save my job." Brian placed the rhythm page in his hand. "Then go back for the truth." Kenneth pressed the elevator button. When the doors opened, Stephanie entered first, carrying her guitar. Brian followed with a notebook. Carol stepped inside without her prepared speech. Kenneth joined them last. Ronald remained in the lobby until Carol held the doors. "You wanted the committee to see a measurable result," she said. "Come watch them measure what you tried to take." The doors began to close. Ronald stepped inside. When the elevator opened, the applause had ended. The Foundation committee stood near the stage collecting coats and folders. Deborah Shaw was speaking to another member when Stephanie returned carrying her guitar. Brian followed with the notebook against his chest. Carol entered behind them, and Kenneth came last. Ronald stepped out beside him. Deborah glanced at the group. "Is there something else?" "Yes," Carol said. "The part we should have told you before asking for money." Ronald moved toward the microphone. Carol reached it first and unplugged it. She stood on the floor beside Stephanie and told the committee about the piano performance 2 years earlier. She described the failed monitor, Stephanie running backstage, and her choice to return to the donors instead of following her daughter. She admitted that Ronald had turned that night into a campaign and that she had approved another performance because she wanted to erase her shame. No one applauded. Deborah closed her folder. Why tell us now? Because the program cannot begin with another polished lie, Carol said. And because the person who taught me that is no longer employed here. Kenneth shook his head. This is not about getting my contract back. It should be, Ronald said. The committee declined the grant. Stephanie placed the guitar case on a wooden platform. She removed the instrument and signed to Carol. Carol turned to Deborah. My daughter wants to answer your question. Brian will explain the parts she asks him to. Brian unfolded the repaired rhythm page beside the guitar. His voice was quiet, but it carried. Stephanie says you asked what you would fund. Not a performance, a way for students to build their own map. He pointed to the taped seam. This was our first one. It got ruined because adults made decisions too fast. We fixed it, but the fix stayed visible. That helped us remember where the system went wrong. Stephanie tapped the page, then touched the rough and smooth strips beneath the strings. Brian continued. Every student would choose different shapes, textures, lights, or vibrations. Kenneth didn't teach Stephanie to play like a hearing person. He helped her figure out how she plays. Deborah looked toward Kenneth. And your role? To listen before building anything, he said. Then work with qualified instructors who understand music better than I do, and students who understand their own bodies better than any of us. Ronald stepped forward. The concept was created with company resources. Any future use must remain under company control. Brian held the notebook tighter. Carol faced Ronald. You offered Kenneth his old job for assigning blame to me and surrendering their work. Deborah's attention sharpened. Did you? Ronald did not deny it. I offered a practical resolution. For whom? Deborah asked. Ronald looked around, searching for the authority he normally borrowed from schedules, contracts, and frightened employees. None reached him now. Carol removed his access card from the lanyard at his waist. You will no longer direct the foundation campaign, she said. Human resources will review your conduct, but this decision is mine. You cannot save the company by humiliating me before donors. I am not saving the company from embarrassment, Carol replied. I am stopping us from using people to avoid it. Ronald placed the lanyard on a chair and left through the side doors. Deborah approached Stephanie's platform. May I try again? Stephanie nodded. The committee returned to the platforms. This time, Stephanie did not play the prepared piece. She played the uneven 8 measures she and Kenneth had created that first afternoon. Brian raised the repaired page. Each shape matched a pulse beneath Deborah's hand. Carol wore the sound-blocking headphones with everyone else. Kenneth stood away from the controls, letting Stephanie set the count. On the final measure, she changed the chord. Kenneth recognized the mistake from their first lesson, but now it was deliberate. Stephanie turned it into the same new pattern she had discovered when he refused to let one wrong note become failure. The vibration traveled through the platform and faded beneath 12 open palms. Deborah removed her headphones. I understand now. She did not approve the original grant. Instead, the committee offered a 6-month development grant, smaller than Carol requested and independent of company publicity. Stephanie, Brian, and Kenneth would retain credit for the system. A licensed music educator would join them, not replace them. Progress would be measured by student choice, participation, and communication, not public performance. Kenneth accepted only after Brian read every page beside him. 3 months later, the glass music room looked different. The rows of chairs were gone. Movable platforms covered the floor, and students chose from textured strips, colored cards, small speakers, and ordinary instruments. Kenneth worked daytime hours as the program's learning coordinator. He still cleaned the room after each session because sawdust and tape collected everywhere. Brian attended school regularly and spent 2 afternoons each week improving the visual rhythm maps. When anxiety tightened his breathing, he no longer hid it from his father. Carol learned to wait outside doors until Stephanie invited her in. She also learned enough sign language to stop depending on others to translate her daughter's anger. One evening, after the final student left, Stephanie handed Kenneth the original repaired page in a simple wooden frame. Across the bottom, she had written, "The first song we felt together." Kenneth hung it beside the light switch, low enough for every child to touch. Stephanie lifted her guitar and tapped 4 counts against the wood. Brian answered on the table. Carol placed her palm on the platform. Then, Stephanie played, and no one in the room needed to hear the music the same way to know it had begun.